Dave Kopel joins us, research director at the Independence Institute. How you doing tonight, Dave?
I'm doing great. How about you?
Fantastic. All right, a lot of stuff I want to talk to you about, but you had an interesting piece at the Vala Conspiracy charting public opinion about the National Rifle Association alongside public opinion about bans on handguns. And I think that the two, probably fair to say, the two are related in terms of how Americans feel, right?
Yeah, that seems to have been true. I think I looked at Gallup polls and also a Reuters poll from going back over the last 20 years. And roughly speaking, the fraction of the population that disapproves of the NRA is about equal to the fraction that would be in favor of banning handguns. And as that fraction of the population has fallen over, happily, the approval for the NRA has gone up approximately in tandem.
All right, now, I mean, how high are we talking about here? I mentioned a higher approval rating for the NRA than President Obama, and that's
not saying much.
Understood. But we're talking about approval ratings of what, 60+%?
Well, yeah. The latest thing is an April poll by that Reuters, Ipsos, and U.S. News did together. And they were a little unusual because they either didn't let people be undecided or they threw out undecideds. But when you make everybody make a decision, the pro-NRA versus anti-NRA is 68 to 32%. And of the demographic group, they broke this down into different demographic groups of whites and blacks, Democrats, Republicans, and independents. And the NRA always had majority support among every one of those demographic groups. The lowest approval rating would be 55% among one of them. So I suppose that's one of the differences with President Obama is he'd have very high approval ratings among Democrats, very low approval ratings among Republicans, and so with independents. But the NRA is on the positive side across all the demographics.
Wow. And again, I mean that's pretty unusual. In this, I saw a new poll out today. Showing that Americans are more sharply divided than we have been, try not to sneeze here, in at least 2 or 3 decades. So, while Americans are diverging in their viewpoints politically, to have an organization like that, as you say, enjoys 50+% from virtually any demographic you could come up with other than perhaps gun-hating Americans, that says a lot about
very, very low approval rating among gun-hating Americans.
That actually says a lot, though, about not just what the NRA does and how involved the NRA has been, but what the attitudes that the NRA has helped shape over the decades. Because you go back to that Gallup poll that you mentioned, 50 years ago, a majority of Americans thought we should ban handguns. Now,
that's right. The first time they asked that was 59, and they got about 60% support for banning handguns, and now it's down to 26%.
Wow. And again, you believe that the National Rifle Association is responsible for a lot of those changing attitudes.
Well, yeah, and that's one of the reasons the people who disapprove of the NRA are, from their point of view, they're being accurate. If it weren't for the NRA, we'd have handgun prohibition in this country or something close to it like they have in Canada, where it's extremely difficult for anybody to own a handgun, although theoretically possible.
Which is funny because this fella, Richard Aborn, who's a gun control advocate up in New York, he's been floating this op-ed around the country. I think I saw it online in the Washington Post. Gun control advocates must take back power from the NRA, he says. And one of the things that he says in this piece, which I find ridiculous, is that the gun control movement has never really been about banning guns.
Well, let's say if we define the gun control movement as Richard Aborn,
yeah.
I've got no reason to doubt his sincerity on that. And I remember actually I'm at a continuing legal education program with him last year, and he used to be the head of handgun control in the early mid '90s. He told me, he said if Brady II had passed, which was their very repressive follow-on bill, but it didn't ban guns other than what they'd already banned, but it was state licensing and mandatory licensing and registration for handguns and lots of other stuff. But he said after that he would have thought the whole thing was over and they were done and they had everything he wanted. And let's give him the benefit of the doubt and say that that's true for him. That's not the movement as a whole. I mean, the gun control movement includes the National Coalition to Ban Handguns, which is now called the Coalition to Stop Gun Violence. It includes the Violence Policy Center, which wants to ban handguns and many, many, many other types of guns. The whole global gun control movement of George Soros and IANSA and that whole crowd, they're in favor of banning either all guns or almost all guns.
Yeah.
So, Richard Aborn may well be a relative moderate in that crowd, but he doesn't speak for the crowd.
Well, as Dave Hardy, who you know well, argued at his blog, Arms in the Law, he just cited the Brady brief in the McDonald decision where they stated, quote, gun possession poses grave risks to the gun possessor, his or her family, and the public. A handgun kept in the home for self-defense is all too often used by a child to shoot himself or another child unintentionally, turned against a partner in a domestic dispute, used to end the life of a depressed teenager or adult with often fleeting suicidal thoughts, or obtained by criminals. As Dave says, in other words, Brady was arguing that guns are a public menace, even in the hands of the law-abiding. But yet they're not anti-gun. They don't want to try to get rid of every gun out there.
But they sure worked pretty hard in court to defend the Washington, D.C. handgun ban.
Yeah, absolutely. And I wonder, I doubt you'd be able to get any of the American gun control groups to sound off on what Venezuela is doing. But, Dave, I'm sure you've seen the stories that Venezuela has, in essence, banned private gun ownership now. They went after licensing a few months ago, and now they are banning the sale of firearms, the commercial sale of firearms and ammunition in Venezuela.
Well, and we see this is how the gun prohibitionists work, is they do a series of incremental controls, of which prohibition is the last step. But absolutely, when you get every gun registered and you have to have a government license to own it, then to take that next step to say, well, now we're going to ban them, is a lot easier, where you know where all the guns are, and nobody has a legal gun without being on a government list. When you look at what's going on down there, Dave, and look, I mean, clearly the forces of totalitarianism are on display. Is there anything that we should take other than, don't let it happen here, away from what's going on in Venezuela? Well, remember, Venezuela Venezuela believes that it has the right model for the rest of the world, and it is trying to export its totalitarian revolution throughout Latin America. They've been making a lot of progress in that regard in Nicaragua, in Bolivia, in Ecuador, to a lesser degree in Argentina, where the pro-Venezuela government there banned book imports, supposedly because of the public health dangers of the lead in the ink from books printed in foreign countries. And they are going to and they have been using the United Nations to advance their totalitarian agenda, and absolutely they're going to, in this summer, at the UN anti-gun conference, try their best to get a arms trade treaty that validates what they've done and provides a model for imposing that globally.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we're going to be covering that treaty up there, Dave, and the process. But appreciate you coming on the program tonight, sir. And any advice to the people of Venezuela who may be listening online?
Oh boy, keep hope alive. These are very dark days. It's what do you do when you see that Iron Curtain descending and you live in Czechoslovakia in 1948, or Russia in November 1918, or Germany in 1933. What a terrible situation. I suppose if there's any way to escape the country, that would have to be pretty seriously considered.
Yeah. Well, listen, Dave, thank you again, sir. I know we'll be talking more in the future, but appreciate your time tonight.
Thanks for having me.